Yeah, lots of stuff to get into in this Dortmund game. Or shall we say the Karim Adeyemi show, Stefan?
Yeah, he was incredible. It felt kind of like it felt like, well, I don't want to say like a kind of monumental moment for him because he's obviously been a very good player for a while, but he has struggled for relevance. He struggled for form. He struggled for fitness throughout his time at Dortmund. He's obviously had to work under a lot of head coaches since he made the move to the club. And yeah, I felt this was a game where we really saw the best of him. And he's a player who's obviously frustrated Dortmund fans for a while now. Um, I think he's often a victim of, almost being too useful in a number of ways. He's obviously very quick. He can score goals, he can create goals, he can run by players, he can run onto long balls. And I think there's always a temptation with Adeyemi to kind of play him out wide as a winger, and just kind of think, right, well, he can beat his man, he can swing a ball in, and that's how he plays as a forward. But as we've seen under, numerous head coaches, I mean, Edin Terzic used to play him as a wing back at times, especially in that Champions League campaign. And to be fair, he did an admirable job of it, but it wasn't the role that he was, brought to the club to play. I feel like since Kovac has came in, he's really managed to get the best out of Adeyemi because he's kind of put him back into that role as almost like a second striker. I did write about Adeyemi not that long ago. It was maybe the start of the season, maybe it was last season. And I went into the stats and looked at his numbers. And the conclusion I've really came to with Adeyemi is that he is a second striker. He's a player who has to kind of be latching onto loose balls in the box. And yes, he can run 60 yards faster just by any other player. And sure enough, he did that today against St. Pauli for the second goal. But I think what he is at his best is what he did for that first goal, which was, a kind of a cross comes into the box. St. Pauli don't defend it properly. It lands at the edge of the box. Adeyemi manages to get onto it. He uses that acceleration to get away from his defender and fire a shot. And the shot wasn't great. It's just, they're actually quite lucky that Giudice was there to kind of latch onto it, like all good strikers are. But it was that little kind of jink away from defender, which I think shows Adeyemi at his best. And I was quite intrigued to kind of take a look at his stats after the game, actually, because what I thought was really telling was that, yes, he was tasked with playing out wide, but he was more or less playing as a second striker. And I had a quick check, and from what I can tell, he made 10 touches of the ball in the St. Pauli box throughout that game, which is the highest he's had in terms of touches in the the opponent penalty area or the opponent box all season. But also what's quite interesting is that if you kind of look at his touches in the penalty box or the opponent's box per game this season, when he was working under Sahin, he would routinely go games without touching the ball in the box at all. Full 90 minutes, not even in the box. Since Sahin's came in, 6 against Stuttgart, 6 against Sporting, okay, just 2 against Bochum, which is a game that no one played well in, 6 against Sporting again, 7 last week against Union, and by my count, 10 against St. Pauli today. So he's definitely played in a more kind of central role. He's played in the more kind of attacking role, and I think that's why Dortmund are getting the best out of him. And I really thought he was a difference maker in this game because Dortmund were pretty poor in the first half. I think actually at half-time, they and St. Pauli more or less were neck and neck for XG. And I actually think I said on social media at half-time, I thought St. Pauli were actually controlling the game better than Dortmund. A moment of magic from Adeyemi kind of turns the game a few minutes into the second half, and then he goes off in this incredible run to score that second goal. And it's a huge 3 points for Dortmund.
That goal of his was incredible. I also thought that the takedown before the Guirassy goal was insanely good as well. I actually looked up the X assists on this. Was 0.08. Which tells you everything you need to know about the intent, I guess, that Adeyemi showed there. No, I thought the second half was outstanding by Dortmund. you mind you though they were playing a St. Pauli side that hasn't always been the best at home, right? This is the caveat, this is the world that we live in. I actually thought a lot of the selection was quite interesting. Bayer out left, Reina again playing the 10 ahead of Brandt, even though Brandt was back in the 11, in the squad. Sorry, not in the 11. I think there is some signals maybe there that Kovac isn't always happy with Brandt, and there's a huge opportunity given here to Gio Reyna, I think, to kind of reestablish himself and take over that role a bit more. And you know what? Once again, Groß and Sabitzer in midfield. Those two. That's you know what? Like, that's the only two that have been constant, other than Guirassy and Adeyemi. He has switched Reina and Brandt, and he has switched Bayer and Gittens, right? In that midfield five, and yeah, like it's really, I think, in terms of giving this team stability, that's been sort of key to say, like, look, we signed Sabitzer to be a midfielder, be a key midfielder for this team, and we signed Groß to play midfield for this team, and this is where I'm going to stick them in, and then I am going to rely on them to provide stability for this team to get the results that everyone expects from them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the Brandt thing is really interesting. You're right. He
Yeah.
missed 2 games now that he hasn't played them, and I think there has been talk about him having a niggling injury, but I thought it was quite telling that when Brandt did come on in this game, it wasn't for Gio Reyna, who was playing in that classic number 10 role. He came on for Bayer, so he was kind of played out wide, which is a role that he kind of used to play, I guess, at Dortmund. It's not what hasn't played that so much under the last kind of couple of head coaches, where he's been the number 10, he's been the main man. And interesting enough, as you said, Gio Reyna. Now, I think it's 2 starts in a row for Gio Reyna, which is interesting.
3, if you include the UCL.
Of course.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I didn't think he played particularly well, to be honest with you, but instead of bringing Brandt on to play instead of him, they brought in Chukwuemeka, obviously the player they brought in from Chelsea, who did tremendously well in the last game when he came on in the second half. I thought he did okay in this game. The match was already won at that point, but there is maybe something quite telling there that Kovac doesn't really like playing Brandt in that central role. And I can understand why, because Brandt, we've talked about this, he's a player who's capable of incredible finesse, he's incapable of scoring incredible goals, he can set up incredible goals. He is Dortmund's de facto playmaker. He's no one in that team can kind of thread a ball quite like him, except maybe Pascal Gross. But he's also a wallflower. He's a player who drifts in and out of games. He's not a player who rolls up his sleeves and drags his team through matches. So obviously having him in the centre of the pitch means Dortmund naturally cede a degree of control in any football match where they play him as a number 10. And I think it's quite interesting that Kovac has come in and said, Brandt probably has a role in this team, but he's not going to be my number 10. Because as we know, Kovac is a player a head coach who prefers pragmatic counter-attacking tactics. He likes to make sure his team are well regimented, they're well set up, everyone knows what responsibilities they have, and that usually means that they have to have 3 very combative midfielders in there. Gio Reyna could be that guy. Maybe he could develop into that kind of really combative number 8. Chukwuemeka obviously can do that, and maybe he signs for the club full-time in the summer and does that. But Julian Brandt's not that player. So it comes down to whether he does kind of spend his, future Dortmund pushed out wide again, or perhaps at the end of the season, Kovac says, I don't actually really need Julian Brandt, and I'm looking at the wage list here, and it says that he's like the 4th or 5th highest paid player of the club, so maybe we finally sell him to Arsenal, been linked with him for the last 6 years. I'm not sure if Arsenal are still interested. I think they moved on to bigger fish by now, but it's interesting. Because he hasn't, of all the players who've played a huge role in this kind of turnaround at Dortmund under Kovac, I would say Brandt is probably the least involved of all the big players in that Dortmund, that dressing room.
It's always interesting because just a few weeks ago, Kovac said that Brandt could be what Jamal Musiala is for Bayern, or what Florian Wirtz is for Leverkusen, and it almost feels like when the board gives the head coach that vote of confidence, the time is ticking, right? And now in retrospect, it actually almost feels like Kovac was doing this to Brandt. There was a lot of eye rolling going on when that statement was posted. I know a lot of people on Blue Sky were quite unhappy with that comparison. And now in retrospect, I think it was maybe Kovac saying like, look, this is the expectations I have for the player playing in that role, and if he's not showing it, and that's been a big issue with Brandt, right? We when he first signed from Leverkusen for Dortmund, he was heralded this is a massive get for the club, right? Here they took this incredible talent away from Leverkusen. Um, it's an amazing job that they have done, and yeah, it's like he has the seasons where he's good. He has seasons where he's a passenger. He never really. He's kind of the sort of player where either it's really good or it's really bad. He doesn't have like the ability to just play a bunch of average games where he just performs. And so I can see why he's currently sitting out. And if you Dortmund and you want to repair maybe the situation with Gio Reyna, this is a good time to do it. And might you do maybe this is also just a ploy for Lille, right? Maybe Brandt is starting again against Lille on Tuesday. This all with the Champions League fixture in mind. That is a really important game for them now, considering where they are in the league. I was going to say where they are in the league and they're out of the Champions League race, but Stefan, I look at the table now. Dortmund is still 10th, right? Bad. But everyone top in front of them is dropping points left, right, and center. Mainz beat Leipzig today, right? That means at the moment it's just 6 points to fourth place, which is Mainz. Although Freiburg can change that reality with a win tomorrow, go to 42 points, and then it would be still 7. But, you feel like now, maybe with a good run of form, maybe that fourth spot isn't out of reach anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is perfectly doable. We had one of our subscribers ask about, we're talking about this, the team selection ahead of the game, and we're talking about Benzabaini playing and Kovac sticking with Emre Can, and we're discussing, maybe he's choosing these guys because he's resting his ideal players for the Champions League. And I was like, no, there's no chance of that. This was a must-win game for Dortmund. They had to win this game, and they have to win basically all their games coming up because, as you said, they've got 6 points to make up on top 4. And they're not going to win every game because they're Dortmund, so they really have to try as hard as they can to catch up with those 6 clubs in front of them. And at one point it was actually looking quite bleak because Dortmund were I think at half time they were obviously 0-0 with St. Pauli. Above them Gladbach were winning, Wolfsburg were winning, I think RB Leipzig were also winning at that point. So you're thinking, even if Dortmund do win here, it's not going to be a huge difference because everyone above them's winning. But obviously that turned around and Leipzig lost. Stuttgart lost as well, and so did Frankfurt. So there are points there up for grabs. There's still so much to play for. There's no doubt about it. And I think that's why this game was so important. It wasn't just important because there was another 3 points in the table. It was the first consecutive win of the season for Dortmund, which is just a crazy stat.
That's crazy.
First time they won 2 league games in a row this season. But obviously it was the all-important away game that they had to win. And I think that was just so crucial to him, so crucial to that the morale in that team. And it does really feel like they're starting to put together some sort of form and some sort of momentum under Kovac. It really feels like we're beginning to see his team. We just discussed the tactics there and the players who are doing well. It feels like we're beginning to kind of see what he wants to do with his team kind of come to fruition, really. And yeah, it's all to play for.
Yeah. We'll see how it continues. Big Champions League game for them on Tuesday against Lille. I think an opponent that can be very dangerous, but where Dortmund too, I think Dortmund will be favored to go through. Should be really interesting. And then, of course, up next for them would be either Benfica or Barcelona. And who knows?
Yeah. I mean, it's Dortmund in the Champions League, so they'll beat Lille 7-0 and somehow squeeze past Barcelona because that just seems to be what Dortmund do these days in Europe. They just confound expectations.
Yeah, I wish I could disagree with that, but it wouldn't shock me at this point. So stay tuned for more.